So this is the KhoodeelaarTV television channel, part A, on Tuesday, 18th of July 2023. And this one is starting with an update. It's a vindication of our analysis and the vindication of our analysis to the fact that we have been saying for almost all the period, all the years since he became installed incumbent as the so-called leader of the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, that KEIR STARMER had been politically murdering the Labour Party. Well, nobody else has said that. Nobody else had the morality or the transparency or the ethics to say that, but they knew, many of them have known, the STARMER is the political murderer of the Labour Party. And it is incredible to notice that today, Tuesday, the 18th of July 2023, the Rupert Murdoch's scum is joining the trend, which is based on Starmer being called the starver. He's starving the children, and he's starving the children in numbers and in terms of the support that the children need. And as a timely, topical insult to him, the Times cartoon is concerned, is showing Starmer walking along with his supposed wife, having a conversation as to whether they can afford to have any children. Now, when we said that Keir Starmer was the political murderer of the Labour Party, for us it was not new. We have world exclusively diagnosed the bankruptcy and the corruption, the stupidity, and the intellectual deficit of Neil Kinnock, and the absolute utter evilness of the Tony Blair. We called him Tony Blair during the year 1997. Everyone else has followed. Well, whoever else has been calling him Tony Blair has been following us. But we noticed that they are not putting the evidence beside this description of Tony Blair. Still, the number is small. Number of those who call him Tony Blair is small compared to the number of the ones that don't use the phrase Tony Blair. Amazingly enough, isn't it, that Tony Blair's son, one son, is almost a billionaire. How did that happen? So the question that I have just posed, how did that happen, should have been obvious question to ask. The Guardian hasn't asked it, and even the Tory ones haven't asked it. There are clearly very serious issues there. He could not even be justifiably a millionaire. But not only is he a millionaire many times over, he's a billionaire almost. And as for the son of the racist anti-Muslim criminal Jack Straw, his son Will Straw, he founded the Left Foot Forward website, which is not in his control today anymore. But that website is one of the criminal, corrupt, untruthful, demonizing, defamatory, lying, hateful outlets that are constantly attacking the very campaigns, movements, and supporters of campaigns and movements that want to create a democracy, accountability, and fairness, and a society in the United Kingdom. There is no opportunity for Left Foot Forward to be used as a correct or correcting outfit. They lie on the assumption that as racists they can practically imitate Boris the Liar Johnson and behave as if they have got impunity from accountability. And they publish fake, fictitious items. So going back to the Financial Times piece that was byline to three of them, three writers, and it's talking about the BBC in crisis. Now that particular item about the BBC in crisis is, of course, contributed to, as one of the contributors includes is Chris Cook. Chris Cook is, he was in a post called the policy editor of the Newsnight program in the BBC until he'll move back to Financial Times in 2021. Now, Chris Cook, we have referred to him during August 2021 in his he wrote a piece about the UK central government employees obstructing freedom of information requests. And we shall talk about that at length in an essay-length edition, updating on that in the context of the evidence of Baby Angel Geronimo. Based on Chris Cook's style, as evident in that piece, and also in a later piece that he wrote about the Charity Commission. Based on the contents of the copy, each time it is clear that Chris Cook was not fit to be policy editor anywhere. The fact that he was appointed by the BBC as policy editor shows the deficiency of the BBC wider bureaucracy itself, and also proves the point that there is hardly any kind of intellectual bar high enough among the so-called British journalists. Now, he wrote a piece about the Charity Commission, and one of the stupidest things that Fleet Street thinkers do is to say that the organization they're reporting or talking about or observing or commenting on needs more power. Now, that is an abject, stupid, idiotic statement to make about the Charity Commission. What the Charity Commission has is enough power. What it doesn't have is the care or concern to use the power it does have to carry out the audit and accountability for the thousands of charities that are operating as corrupt, fraudulent enterprises under the banner of charities. When I had the challenge with William Shawcross, the supporter of genocide and mass murders, an anti-Muslim shaitan, I had the confrontation with him at the Institute of Contemporary Arts. And that shaitan, I'm defining shaitan as defined in the Surah Al-Isra and the rest of the Holy Quran. That shaitan was quite clearly of the view that he had no accountability and that he was impugned from any accountability for whatever he was saying or whatever he was doing. Many years later, decades later, that shaitan became a conservative appointee as the chairman of the Charity Commission. Now, the Charity Commission has never been up to scratch. It has never been. And it applies to the other charities that are apparently supposedly supervised by the Charity Commission. As we have made the case about the completely dysfunctional shelter housing charity. And of course, the very corrupt age concern. And of course, when it comes to finance and banking, I mean, whatever exists as the financial ombudsman, whatever, is totally corrupt. What is the word I have just used? Corrupt. And it is the occurrence of that concept of corruption, that dominates the last 72 hours coverage of the London Metropolitan Police paying £2 million to the family, or the relations of the investigator who had been murdered in March 1987 in the car park belonging to the Lion. Is it Golden Lion Park in Sydenham in South London? It has since been possible to see some of the outlets because the actual news about the 2 million pound settlement or agreement reached by the London Metropolitan Police with the family and relations of the late Daniel Morgan. It has been possible to see references made by others, not in the Times, which originally broke the story of this particular event, that Daniel Morgan was targeted by the murderer or murderers because the meeting that he had attended in the Golden Lion pub just before he was murdered was a meeting to discuss Daniel Morgan's evidence, investigation into the connection between the criminals running the drugs business and a number of the London Metropolitan Police, and the link with the news of this cruise, the news of the world that Rupert Murdoch owned, and news of the world that was scrapped by Rupert Murdoch during his sitting of the Levison inquiry. It wasn't scrapped because of the Levison inquiry as such, but because of the information that was coming out about the role of the news of the world in surreptitiously, corruptly, criminally, posthumously accessing the mobile telephone and the contents of the telephone line number that belonged to the murder victim, Millie Dowler. So outraged were the ordinary people by the behavior of the Murdoch news of this cruise that he found himself forced to declare that the news of the world would be scrapped, which he did. Now it's something that he did a decade and a half before his deal with the American defamation complainant against the Fox News that he owns. Because on behalf of the Fox News, Murdoch agreed to pay the defamation claimant a total more than $1 billion, including all the other peripheral expenses. So what there is the tendency or the trend or the pattern of dirty digger Rupert Murdoch not willing to face open kind of trial of his misconduct. So the news of this cruise was scrapped instead of it being the subject of multiple claims in the courts within the UK jurisdiction. Now, despite the fact that the courts in this country, the UK jurisdictions, are themselves corrupt and contextually they're racist, and they are fronted by licensed law traders of certain seniority who are perennially totally ignorant about the law, the constitution, ethics, morality, and the rest of it. And this is despite the fact that from time to time, reports appear that the High Court has made a right decision, etc., etc. Now, the difference between the right decision and the token decision again is of such complexity that I will not start discussing that at any length in this edition, but shall do that at another time. Judges, for a start, are ordinary, like other human beings. They got the license to trade as lawyers, law traders, and then after a certain number of years, they become eligible to apply for and be appointed to the various benches. Anyone reading the actual transcripts, most of the transcripts read like confessions of thugs. These judges are themselves engaged in criminality. They lie. Judges in the county courts, the magistrates' courts, the divisional courts of the High Court, which are now called the, after the name of the monarch, the gender of the monarch. The Queen's Bench division has become the King's Bench division, etc. And all the references to the monarch have been changed to the masculine, male gender. Senior barrister, so called, given the marketing display, Queen's Counsel, have of course swiftly become King's Counsel, and so on. So, anyone reading the jurisprudence, that is to say, the actual thoughts and reasoning, will find that the absolute majority of the judges are dishonest, and they express their dishonesty in the knowledge that they are doing this in public, but also with the confidence that was filed in 2014 against the 2014 so-called election to the post of executive mayor in Tower Hamlets. The conclusion that Richard Morey came to, that is to say, to kick Luthorman out of the post, was partly correct. But some of the obiter dicta, the idiotic words in passing, references in passing that Morey made, were contaminated by Morey's ignorance and more is racism and lack of education. So when the Financial Times runs the piece co-written by Chris Cook about the future of the BBC, there is in the piece, it's called the Big Read about the media. At the beginning of that piece, there is a reference to Gary Lineker and a controversy that prevailed about Gary Lineker about a few months ago. But the reference that they made about Gary Lineker's statement at the center of the debate was completely wrong. Gary Lineker never said what the Financial Times claims he had said. Gary Lineker had been very careful and 100% correct to use the phrase that the language that was being used, like what he was meaning was the language being used by Suella Ibila Cruella Fernandez about child refugees invading the country. That's what he was talking about. The language that was being used was reminiscent of the language being used in Germany in the 1930s. That is exactly what happened, and that is exactly what Gary Lineker said, but that is not what the Financial Times published about what Gary Lineker had said. The fact that there are three writers mentioned there as the byline holders, and the fact that this woman who is in post as editor of the Financial Times was previously mentioned as being a Muslim born in Lebanon. That is very significant because the reason why they have appointed her as editor of the Financial Times is precisely because they know that she would be not only a more aggressive racist, a more aggressive inciter of hatred against Muslims, but that she would also be a more aggressive mental slave. Because the atmosphere in the United Kingdom surrounding the publication of the alleged allegations against Hugh Edwards over the various communications Edwards conducted with people, those items that dominated about 6-7 days in the mainstream media were essentially driven by the agenda that prevails in the United Kingdom to undo the BBC as an independent, non-partisan outlet. As I said before, just in the same way as the criminals opposing, undermining and exploiting the slightest excuse to condemn the NHS as a whole are prone to do because they want to undo the idea of an NHS which is based on the avowed principle that care or health care at the point of need, regardless of ability, etc., etc. So, what KEIR STARMER is doing by refusing to alter the Conservatives' policy on limiting benefits for the children is what the main agenda has always been about the BBC, about the NHS, about the very idea of the existence of society. And that can extend to the idea of fairness, access to fair remedies through the court system. I mean, the other item in the news has been about the universities ripping off, the ripping of degrees. Now, that is only a tip of the iceberg because the main purpose of the British universities is, of course, business. And the fact that they have routinely overhyped their status as intellectually operating on a higher level than any other competitor jurisdictions is part of the technique. For instance, the PhD that the University of Birmingham gave to a midget called Ali Asghar about Tower Hamlets was nothing but a disguised attack, a libel, defamation of me. Full stop. How dare they did that? How dare they thought that they would get away with that? But the fact that they did do think that, and the midget did think that, shows not just their mistaken belief that they could attack me, defame me under the cover of academic research and get away with it. That shows that that is what they always do. Most of the people that they attack or misrepresent and tell lies about under the guises of research, like the midget Ali Asghar has done, they are not able to either notice what they have done or they are not able to challenge them. Now, I have been engaged in challenging the University of Birmingham's lying since I became aware of it almost 20 years ago. And as in the Holy Quran it says, Innal batila kana zahuqa. That pack of lies will perish, and it will be exposed as overdue for perishing. The midget is a liar. He is a conveyor of batil, the lies and falsehood, as are the colluders complicit with the project to defame me. They are all liars. But the audacity is absolutely stunning, isn't it? They thought that they would do it and they would bypass the requirements of the laws of defamation, historic and the contemporary one. And the reason why they targeted me was because they couldn't deal with my campaign and challenges. They found every point that I made was truthful. Innal batila kana zahuqa. So they went and hid behind the academic smokescreen. The midget, if he survives, if he's alive by the time I'm finished with him, mind that he should not have done that. The midget owes me personally more than he can write about in his biological, material remainder of the life. And there is no one, not in Tower Hamlets, not in the United Kingdom, not anywhere else, who matches one fraction of the work that I do. So the midget was wrong. The Russell group of university shitbags are absolutely wrong. But what they've exposed themselves as doing is that they are as corrupt as the London Metropolitan Police. Because the London Metropolitan Police paying £2 million to the family of Daniel Morgan. What are they confessing? They're confessing that they, the London Metropolitan Police, have abolished the idea of policing themselves. I mean, the man was murdered 36, 37 years ago. Why should it have taken even a year, let alone 36 years, before the series of excuses to be made about the fact that there is no policing? As Doreen Lawrence, Stephen Lawrence's mom, and Neville, Stephen Lawrence's dad, have said, and said on the first-hand experience, there is no policing. Well, that is my paraphrase of what they've been saying. There is no policing. If there were policing, I mean, there's even yesterday's item about Stephen Lawrence, so that there are 6 other murderers of Stephen Lawrence at large or not held to account yet. So when the so-called COVID-19 rules are broken by Boris Johnson, the congenital liar, people wonder how does he do that? How does he do that and how does he get away? Well, there is no mystery. He gets away, as does Matt Hancock, and as David Cameron did and George Osborne, by mounting their attacks on the poorest benefit claimants and the most sick and unwell claimants to benefits. There is no forum. There is no really what Maggie Thatcher meant when she said there is no such thing as society. It wasn't that there were not people, that there were no demography, that there were not people kind of apparently living in families and other relationships and doing business in shops and trading with one another. What Maggie Thatcher meant from her knowledge and experience was that despite the fact that there is an overwhelming evidence of her regime being corrupt, unaccountable, she wasn't being put under pressure. So the sum total of the frustration and the outrage that would have brought the pressure on her didn't materialize. And the reason why it didn't materialize was because people were not solidarizing with one another sufficiently. The only time when the people did do that was when she made the mistake and introduced the poll tax. And there was this particular block on the other side of the border, to the north of the border, which is Scotland. And the Scottish outrage and resentment against the English was far more kind of together, consolidated for the street actions to be staged in Scotland against poll tax in a way that didn't happen in the south of the island. And that is what actually put poll tax that Thatcher had introduced. But she was right that among Little Englanders, there is not enough sense of society. So we go back to the way that we defeated the government's plot to dig a hole in Brick Lane, Crossrail Hole. I mean, I read the symptoms in the local towns council and the local other elected politicos correctly. And I focused on them, their careers. Very clear that I would make sure that they didn't get elected next time, because that was what their life depended on, if you like. Because they didn't have any worth about anything that they did with their existence. Only thing they could do was to say that they are a councillor or something like that. They didn't have the intellect, they didn't have the dedication, they didn't have the concept of doing work for all of humanity or society, etc., etc. So they would be sunk without the opportunity of being a councillor. And extending that, extrapolating that, the case of Abbasuddin Elias Halal. I mean, Abbasuddin Elias Halal, even now, 20 years since I began on him, is still fantasizing that he would one day become a member of parliament from one of these two constituencies, and if not from somewhere else, by using his connection with Tower Hamlets Bangladeshis. I told Abbasuddin Elias Halal almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago, that if he didn't cooperate with the campaign that I was running, effectively I told him in a short kind of meeting held in the Greater X Street, I told him that if he didn't cooperate with the campaign, then his failure or refusal to cooperate with the campaign would force us to take the action that would not be very helpful to him. In other words, I said, we shall sink you, which we did. Because when it came to the selection for the next election, selection of the Labour Party candidate, that is, for election at the 2010 parliamentary election, Bethnal Green and Bow, we went to the meeting, and outside of the meeting, we created such a show that anyone who had ears could not hear what we were saying. And they did not vote for Abbasuddin Elias Halal because of us. That is one of the things we would do, and we did that. Now, there is no way that Abbasuddin Elias Halal is going to get back on course again. It will be a very long battle. As for Lutfur Rahman, we told him that he was a liar. And he didn't listen. But it took Richard Morey to kick him out. Now, he is back now since May 2022, but he will face serious consequences again because essentially he's a liar. And the other thing is that Paula Monzila Uddin, the thief in the House of Peers, we predicted decades ago that Paula Monzila Uddin was a thief, a criminal, and would disgrace the community. So when we took on the central government and we said that we don't want the plot to dig a hole in Brick Lane, we gave them the clear description of what damage that plot would do to the community and the extent to which we shall go and defend the community against such a plot. So we did that. And I did nothing, substantially nothing, apart from doing the basic things like using the time necessary for food and health. But essentially, I gave 80% of my time for 8 years non-stop to do the campaign and find out everything and apply every evidence against all these crooks that were in the council and rebutting the criminality of the House of Parliament. They cannot be doing this by making pathetic, timid, plaintive, moaning noise about HS2. And they have created a pretext. Because the railway industry is not on the up economically. It has been on the down for a very long time. In addition to that, the British infrastructure, railway infrastructure, is in need of repair, maintenance that would cost trillions of pounds. And they're ignoring that. So they're paying anything up to 200 billion pounds to new contractors for HS2. And by the time HS2 theoretically is finished, there won't be enough users to begin to recoup the money. It will take hundreds of years. While the rest of the infrastructure that is really needed by people across the rest of the country, because remember, HS2 is only one part, thousands of a part of the railway networks. Those are collapsing, deteriorating. And there is a conspiracy on the part of the parliament, the opposition, and the media to stay silent about that. Now, going back to KEIR STARMER and calling him the STARMER of children, Yvette Cooper, who is the shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper is a right winger. Her father was a warmongering careerist. And her husband, Ed Balls, is a close friend of the crooked, corrupt George Osborne. So these people may belong to the Labour Party, but they are not carriers of Labour Party ideology, and most certainly have nothing but contempt for the agenda for which the Labour Party was founded. And the fact that the frontbenchers on the Labour Party, so called waiting for to form the next government, they're doing whatever they're doing, and there is no real opposition locally against them, shows that they will remain in their posts. Unlike in Tower Hamlets, when we made it clear to Una King that we shall see her through, ousted from the constituency, which we did. Now, there is no way that any of the campaigns, so called, against the rights of the children, rights of the poor people, rights of the NHS, really a resourced NHS, that Keir Starmer is attacking. There is no, the action to raise salaries, the strike actions, is not a campaign. It's a very selfish and very politically kind of limited thing, which the Conservatives know about, and they really don't care about the strike actions. In fact, every time there is a strike action, in terms of propaganda, it is an excuse for the Conservatives to tell the little Englanders that look at the trade unions, they are doing this, bringing the country to a standstill. It doesn't go anywhere near explaining the dysfunction of the capitalist corrupt system. We shall be talking about all of those in due course, of course, as and when they come up. And as I said, the issue of Daniel Morgan shows that the police do not exist. And there is no evidence anywhere in the political parties, in the so-called, well, within heavy quotation marks, progressive part of the Fleet Street newspapers, that they are critical of the fact that the policing has been scrapped, abolished. The ugly Priti Patel appeared in a very short clip during Monday, commenting on the latest news coverage about Daniel Morgan's and the Metropolitan Police being publicly condemned as being corrupt. How was that possible? She did do that, and the media did carry that without any slightest sense of noting how stupid and ironic that was. She was Home Secretary. And during her period in the post, the ugly Priti Patel did not refer to the absence of policing. And the media on Monday, that is in the last 24 hours, have allowed Suella, Evila, Cruella, Fernandez to stay uncriticized condemned about the unanimous findings by several inquiries that the London Metropolitan Police are corrupt. Suella Ibila Cruella has not thought that any of the dysfunction, unfitness for purpose, and mainly the corruption, bedeviling and disabling the police is as bad as the invasion of this country by the most frightened, desperate children and their frightened, desperate parents, desperately frightened to look for some kind of safe place. Out of the desperate places, they are fleeing back in Africa and Asia. So we shall be talking about all of those in due course. In the meantime, we shall put an end to this particular edition, which is coming just over 56 minutes. And we shall continue in due course, as I said, with other topics, other updates.